Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Not D&D, and we have another Halloween theme this week. We'll be talking about the Alien RPG, and with me to talk about that, we have a guest come back on the show again, so I clearly didn't scare you last time when we talked about Blade Runner. Tomas, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Good to be back on.
So could you tell us a little bit about the kind of Alien RPG and your role in creating it?
Yeah, sure. The Alien RPG is one of the first big kind of licensed RPG that we did. Actually, not the very first license, but the previous ones were a bit smaller. So this was a big moment for us and a big project, and something, a bit of a dream project for a lot of us. It started about 4 or 5 years ago now when we started thinking about it, working on it, and then it took some time to actually complete it. And my role was primarily as a rules designer to design the actual rules of the game. That was kind of my main job, as well as being like a project manager, just making sure everything came together, just to actually make that thing of all its component parts into a game, working with the layout, the artist, and the illustrators and everybody else. So I was a bit of the keeping all of this stuff together, and with a specific, where it comes to design, I did rules mostly.
Amazing. And clearly it went very well because, like you say, it's been out for about 4 or 5 years now. It won the 2020 Golden Emmy Award for the best game. So clearly a very good success. Like you mentioned, it's such a big license, and so such an exciting time for the company. We were talking about licensing on the podcast the other week. How did you get the license for the Alien RPG? Like, how did that start? Was it a long pitch process, or
Well, yeah, it was fairly quick, but yeah, of course, there's a pitch process involved. We started talking to Joe LaFavis. He works as an agent in Hollywood, and he works in licensing and so on. So we met him through some mutual acquaintances, basically, and then we started talking. And just shortly before that, we actually had kind of a brainstorm, within Free League, about which would be like the kind of dream licenses, and we had ended up with a very short list, and Alien and Blade Runner were on that very short list. So and as it happened, Alien was the one that kind of moved a bit faster than Blade Runner, but they both started at the same time. So yeah, we did a pitch for the Alien RPG through Joe, and then things started moving pretty quickly. I don't remember exactly how quickly, but it was a matter of a few months before we actually had the agreement in hand and started actively working on the game.
Amazing. The game, and as you mentioned, Blade Runner, which is also on the shortlist, also exists now. You just closed, I think, the pledge manager for that. So I'm very excited for shipping in kind of late November, a little bit before Christmas, to come out. But going back to Alien, which we're talking about this session, but if you are interested in Blade Runner, we've done another interview on here you can go back and listen to. I think this is a fantastic system. As I said, it's award-winning. I love the little nods in the game, because clearly you and the team that worked on it love the Alien series. It's such a fantastic setting. Like, there's little nods, like the fact the person running the game is called the Game Mother. Is just like tiny things like that. I'm like, this is fantastic. How did you approach taking on this license and integrating the rules to make sure it fit the setting?
Yeah, when approaching any game, really, and this was certainly no exception, we always kind of try to figure out how can we turn this into a game. What do we need to focus on, and in terms of the rules, how do we bring out that alien feeling that in the rules of the game? I strongly believe that the rules and the setting really need to work together. I don't think any kind of generic system will work for every setting. I mean, you can probably do it, but we always try to create rule systems that kind of enhance the theme of the game. And this, we did that very much here. And I think we try not to overload our games with rules. So rather than having lots and lots of rules for everything, we try to focus the rules on that thing that will make it feel like an Alien game. And I think in this case, the biggest example of that is the stress mechanic that we came up with, which is a variation of the pushing mechanic that we had in other Year Zero engine games, as we now call it. But the stress mechanic is something that was very specific to Alien to give that horror film feel of mounting tension, and that was really that core when it came to the rules design for Alien.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, mentioned with all your Free League games, we kind of use the Year Zero engine as like kind of the base to power it, but then you tweak and change and edit so it fits the setting really well. So for people that don't know, could you briefly say what the basic Year Zero engine is, and then maybe go into how stress works in the Alien game mechanically?
Sure. Yeah, the core of all of the Year Zero engine games are a bit different. It actually didn't start as a generic, like an overall system. It started out with the game Mutant Year Zero, and hence the name, which is a post-apocalyptic game. And then we just sort of kept working on that core engine and tweaked it, modified it quite heavily to fit other games. But what is common to all of them, I guess, well, most of them, this started out as a D6 dice pool. Actually, not all of the Year Zero games are that anymore, but most of them are, and that kind of where it started. So you have a dice pool of 6-sided dice, and you want to roll sixes. It's basically a very simple core, and the number of dice you get is influenced by your attributes and skills and gear and whatever else you might have. So it's a very simple tactile system where you have a pool of dice, and the more you get, the better it is, and then you want to roll sixes. It's like super simple. But then there's also the pushing mechanic, which is basically a re-roll. You get to roll the dice again at some form of cost or risk or danger, and whatever that cost, risk, danger is depends on the game, and that is different in every game. And in Alien, you have the stress dice. So basically, when you push a roll, you get another die, a yellow stress die, which actually means your pool increases in size, which is good. It increases the chance of success. So actually, when you get stressed, when you push, you actually get more dice, higher chance of success. But these stress dice, they keep mounting, so you get a bigger and bigger pile of them, which can help you. But if you roll a 1 on them, one or more of them, when you push a roll or when you make a roll, then you will actually trigger some kind of fear or panic attack, which can spiral into chaos, basically. So that it's kind of like a game of blackjack or 21, that it's all good. You get more and more of these dice, but then if you get too many, it's going to explode. So on that pile of yellow dice is kind of like a constant tactile reminder of the kind of mounting pressure in the game. So that's kind of the way it works, and makes it very, very clear to the player that, all right, I'm, it's about to go off, where it's getting closer and closer to that point of where just panic erupts and things escalate from there. So that's kind of the core. There are lots of nuances to this, but that's basically how it works.
Yeah, and like you say, that is something that's so clearly designed to mirror the feeling in the film, where there's this rising tension, and it's like the moment when they're standing there and the dots are coming closer and closer and closer to them, and it's just that building kind of horror feeling and that tension for it, which is why perfect for Halloween, a game to play for that. So speaking of stress and panic, that's a very kind of human response to a scary situation. But characters you can play in the games, you can play as androids as well in the game, and they have a different mechanic.
Yeah, there are. There are definitely androids in Alien, and it's a bit different. In Blade Runner, there's like a choice when you create your character if you want to be a replicant or human. It's like very equal terms. They work a bit differently, but it's like an even choice, basically. That's how. That's not quite the same in Alien. In Alien, you don't normally create an android character per se. You can, but it's kind of not the norm. Instead, what we have in at least a few of these cinematic scenarios, or some of them, is that one of the characters is a secret android. It's kind of also, of course, goes back to the film. So there is that option that someone who pretends to be human is actually not, and that is revealed at some point during the scenario. And that works particularly well in this format that we have called cinematic scenarios, which are played with pre-generated characters that are pre-made for the adventure and designed to work within that specific adventure. And that means you can do a lot of these kinds of things. Like each character has a personal agenda, something that they want, but perhaps not the whole group wants. And you can even have like traitors in the group and hidden androids in the group, and that works much better in this kind of confined one-shot scenarios type with pre-generated characters, because then you kind of just hand them out and you don't need to create this by yourself. So that is where you most commonly would find an android as a player character.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, there's kind of two different modes you can play. You have the cinematic play you were just talking about, which is, as you say, kind of pre-written scenarios that you can just jump in and play for a one shot. But you can also have campaign play as well. And assuming that you could make your own characters and go out and explore the terrifying universe that is Alien.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, briefly there outlined the cinematic scenarios. There's 3 of them out now. There is Chariot of the Gods, which is included in the starter set for the Alien RPG, and then there is Destroyer of Worlds, which is it continues the story in a way. You're not expected. You're not playing the same characters, but the kind of overall background, the overarching meta plot, kind of continues. And now, just recently, we released the 3rd cinematic scenario called Heart of Darkness. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Which is basically, and that has a new cast of characters and a new kind of environment and situation in which you'll play. So that's kind of the cinematic scenarios. But then we also have, like you mentioned, campaign mode. There's support for that in the core rules, the core rule book. Basically, in campaign mode, you create your own characters. You're meant to play longer campaigns over a longer period of time. That means you might not run into xenomorphs quite as often, because doing that will quite often mean, the
instant
end of
death.
a character.
Yeah.
So it can be. Yes, it can be. So it's a bit of a different feel to it, because what is cool is that there's actually a lot more to the Alien universe than you might if you've seen the films, but that's all good. But there's a lot more than that in the expanded universe. So in the core book, there's a lot of setting information, and also we're making these campaign books, which are a bit more meaty. I have one like
oh, amazing!
One. It's a big meaty book for playing colonial marines. So this is the first campaign book that we did, and this is it's huge. It's like it's like 350 pages or something. And this one has lots of setting material and missions to play, and this is for a longer campaign where characters potentially can actually survive for a bit longer and play a more of a long form game. So those are the 2 game modes that we have. So that's kind of the idea, that we have these cinematic scenarios, and then we have these campaign books for playing longer campaigns in some sort of environment. This one, like I mentioned, is for colonial marines, which are what you see in the 2nd film. But we were now working on a campaign book for explorers and colonists. So that's probably what will be next in terms of releases for the game.
Exciting. So, like you said, this has been out for a while, and it seems like it's a line that you're planning on doing more and more content for. So, something that's great to kind of jump in on now. With the cinematic that kind of play style you talked about, I'm guessing it's not expected that your character you're playing is going to survive, because is that fair?
Well, you can. It happens. I think. But it's rare, I think, that all characters survive, because in the cinematic mode, you are a group, but you can also, like I mentioned, have different agendas and so on, and in some cases widely different agendas that will often escalate towards, can end in a fairly in confrontation between characters, and that's built up through 3 acts. Each of these cinematics have act 1, 2, and 3, and in each act, each character gets a new agenda, personal agenda, and that kind of helps push the characters to their own. So really, at the end of the cinematic scenario, what tends to happen, and what tends to be a lot of fun, in my opinion, is that it's really driven by the characters themselves. It's not really a case where something external happens and the characters just try to overcome it. It's more of the characters actually push their own agendas to the forefront at the end of the 3rd act, and that's kind of, anything can happen, and it can play out in lots of different ways. But yeah, it does mean that it's fairly rare for all characters to survive. It also happens that everybody dies. That's well, that's sad, but it does happen. But I guess the most common end is that maybe one or two characters survive out of the group or something like that, which is very much what you see in the Alien films as well, with Ripley signing off at the end with everybody else dead. That's kind of also how many of these scenarios tend to play out. But of course, it all depends on the decisions of the players themselves. So it can take any form in the end.
Mm-hmm. I think obviously a lot of people that choose to play this game are big fans of the films and know the world quite well. But obviously when we're playing a role-playing game, we don't just want to repeat walking through the film because we've already seen that. So is it possible to give us a sort of little brief intro as to what some of the scenarios are, obviously without any spoilers, but what's the kind of setup? Where are we? What sort of characters are we playing?
Yeah, sure. We have identified in the core game like 3 what we call campaign frameworks, types of characters that you play. And I think they are all obviously inspired by the films. So you have in the first cinematic scenario, you have like what we call space truckers, basically a crew on a commercial space liner or something of some sort that just try to scrape by, do their job, but of course they're drawn into something horrible. Then there is the colonial marines that I mentioned, and the third campaign frame is explorers or colonists that you, for example, see in the Alien Covenant film, like perhaps like a big ship going out far into the far reaches of space to colonize new worlds. So those are the 3 campaign frames, and each of the cinematic scenarios kind of cater to each. So now we have 3. The first one's the Chariot of the Gods is you play a team of space truckers, and the kind of that setup, it starts in a way that will probably feel quite familiar to the first film. Basically, you're that team of space truckers on a ship, fairly similar to the Nostromo, and there is a distress call and something happens. So that will feel very familiar. And that's kind of the point. That's how we designed it, to get you in easily into the game, because if you've seen that film, you will immediately kind of get a mental image of, okay, I get this. I know where I am. I know what this looks like. And you kind of get into perhaps the kind of banter that they do in the film, whining about not getting enough shares on this run or whatever. So that really helps getting the game started. But then those expectations are we try to subvert them at every move, so that you will not know what's going to happen. And if you think you know what's going to happen, it's probably going to be something completely different. So we do work and use those expectations that you will have having seen the films, but then we trip them up and twist them and do something a bit different with them, just so that players will not know what's going to happen. And that's kind of the challenge when designing these scenarios, and that's what we really try to do at every turn.
Fantastic. Sounds like a great setup there, and I like the idea that there's twists and turns that happen. You kind of mentioned with, like you say, it's kind of familiar because people know the world and the setting. Would you say it's a good role-playing game to invite people that haven't tried role-playing before? Would this be a good kind of starting point for people?
I think so, yeah. And especially perhaps the starter set, which has that first cinematic scenario included, and also everything you need to play it. I think it's a good starting game because A, you might be familiar with the Alien films, which helps. And B, also this rule system is pretty straightforward and not very mechanically complex. It enhances the theme, but beyond that, it's fairly straightforward and easy to grasp for a new player. I do think, though, you have to be prepared for the type of story you will be experiencing and kind of embrace that. If you hate the idea of your character possibly, not making it through, then it might not be the game for you. But I think even a beginner player can be equally open to that kind of play that as a veteran player can be, perhaps even more so, because sometimes veteran RPG players are very much set in how they want their game to be and might actually have a harder time accepting a game that has a high chance of killing your character. So I think it's a good game for beginners.
Fantastic. We invited you on because it's Halloween, it's October, and for me, Alien is a fantastic kind of horror game to play. It is a particular style of horror, like you say, the panic, the rising tension, the building, and then a moment of kind of action and panic happens. Do you have any advice for kind of GMs on how to run a horror game like that? Because I think sometimes it can be a bit intimidating to run a horror-themed game.
It's true, yeah. Horror games have that challenge, an additional challenge to kind of get players into the mood. So mechanics can get you part of the way, definitely. I think they can certainly, the right mechanics can help you get that sense of rising tension in a game. But of course, there's a lot more that you can do as a game master. And I think just easy things are like, don't, be in the right place, don't have like bright lights on, have something, just set the mood in the room, perhaps some creepy music, even sound effects can be super effective when running games like this. So tricks like that I think are particularly useful in horror games, and certainly Alien as well. So I think that is one clear, fairly straightforward piece of advice that I would give to anyone running this.
Fantastic. And so we talked a bit about some of the books and the things you can get. And I assume all of these are kind of on alienrpg.com for people to kind of take a look at. So you've mentioned a little bit about the kind of future of the line. Could you give us a little summary of what's currently available and what's kind of future plans? So if people are interested, they know where to jump in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, like I mentioned here, we have some stuff behind me. This is the starter set, and it's not only, it has Chart of the Gods, which is the full cinematic scenario, but it also has a lot of stuff that you will find useful even when playing campaign play as well. You have like the dice, you have the big star map, and you have lots of stuff in this box that you will find useful when playing the game. You have whatever scenario or campaign you're playing. So I think that's a great place to kind of start off. Then, of course, there is the core rule book. Which is almost 400-page beast of a book.
Yes, it is a heavy, big book.
It is a heavy, big book. It was actually never intended to be quite this big and heavy, but it kind of grew out of our control a bit. So it is now a very big book, but still fairly accessible, I think, and not, so that's, of course, when you want to dig, when you're done with the starter set, you play that first scenario and you want to kind of dig deeper, this is kind of where you go. And it also has lots and lots of setting material, just, so much information, even if you're not a role player. I think you should be, but if you're not, you're just interested in Alien, it has like so much stuff in here that you probably never knew, and it's all coming from canonical sources. I mean, we had to put some stuff together, but it's really not, we didn't make that much up from scratch. It's all very much based on, like, there's a bunch of novels, comics, the films, obviously, the video games, and we kind of really dug deep into the lore of the Alien universe. And a lot of that, you can find all of that in the core book. And then you have, like I mentioned before, the Colonial Marines book. And then there is the second cinematic scenario, Destroyer of Worlds, where you play Space Marines, Colonial Marines. And these kinds of, these come in boxed sets. So you have lots of maps and handouts and things in each of these. Pre-generated characters, cards, all this stuff. And then Heart of Darkness, which is the newest release. So yeah, and we definitely have, so that's what we have out so far, but there's definitely more stuff coming for the game. We hope to work with this one for a long time. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it's been so successful, I'm sure that will be the case. Talking a little bit about the core book, I've only ever watched the films, so I don't know as much about the expanded lore kind of in the universe. Are there any interesting stories or bits of information from the wider setting you could share with us? Because I'm a little bit ignorant to it myself.
There is a lot. And I should say, even though I certainly work with it, I'm not the key lore writer. That's Andrew Gaska, who did the lore writing. So I, of course, know it, but I don't know it on that kind of detailed level.
Oh, sure.
But there is definitely so much different systems. There's a whole alien species that that are only mentioned in passing in one of the films, the Arcturians, that are described here. You have so there's a lot like weird cults in space that are also quite interesting. And yeah, there's just lots and lots of stuff and cool concepts and ideas and horrible xenomorphs of different kinds that are also described in detail. So yeah, there is just a lot of things in there if you're interested in the Alien universe.
Fantastic. So maybe just a Christmas gift for somebody who's really into aliens as well. Like you say, even if they're not a role player, it sounds like it's a nice kind of collectible item to have.
I think so.
Well, thank you for sharing so much about the Alien RPG with us. Obviously, for Halloween, this is a perfect kind of horror-themed game. But do you have any recommendations or suggestions for any other maybe horror-themed games that you think people would enjoy playing?
Apart from Alien, you mean?
Apart from Alien. I mean, I said obviously Alien is the one you would choose first. But when they finish that, what else would you recommend?
Yeah, well, it's hard not to suggest another title of our own that I think is quite nice. I mean, this one. It's called,
yes.
I think it's very Halloween compatible. It's called Vaesen, Nordic horror role playing. So basically, it's a gothic horror game based on Nordic folklore, and it's uses the same core system as Alien actually, but with a bit of a different take on it. But it's very much that kind of 19th century going out onto the wilds and investigating weird cases revolving on about these strange creatures and monsters that you would find in Nordic folklore. So this is, I think, perfect alongside Alien, a perfect Halloween RPG.
Perfect. And if people are interested in hearing more about that, we have actually done an interview on it on Not D&D a few months back, so you can listen to a full interview and learn more about it there. Well, I think that might be everything this week. So, Tomas, thank you so much for coming on and coming back again. And maybe we'll have you on again in the future to tell us about another one of your wonderful games.
Absolutely. Thank you.